One of the comments is, can you address verbal abuse in marriage, such as yelling, screaming, and profanities? Overall, the relationship is good until the partner is triggered.
Well, you being the couples therapist, I would like you to address that first.
So this is what's happening is that your romantic partner, if they are getting this triggered, is they're emotionally flooded. And they need to take responsibility of the words they're saying, the actions they're making, and realize that when they are at that point, they are far beyond their capacity to actually engage in a conversation. And when I'm working with couples where this might come up, is we actually create a flooding ritual where right before something gets that nasty, there's a certain things that happen in the interactions between a couple, and we do a timeout signal or an all stop, which is we agree to stop this conversation because if it goes any farther, it's going to blow up. And so then they go and they take a 20-minute break where they're thinking what I call relationship enhancing thoughts. And then they come back in a calmer state and start to navigate the conflict together. Now, that doesn't always work. And in that case, the person who's dealing with the partner who is verbally abusive is they must get away from that. And you got to be firm with your partner and say, this is not how I want to be talked to. But no, so I don't want to be talked to this way. And if you're going to talk to me, choose to talk to me this way, I'm going to leave. And then when you're ready to talk about this and have a dialogue with me, then let's do that. And often what I see is conflict avoidant individuals tend to be the ones that get super emotionally flooded and can be very aggressive, or individuals who are more volatile and their emotions almost are so overwhelming that they just dominate the conversation. And so the key part is learning to self-soothe as that partner, if that's you. And if you're dealing with that partner, set up boundaries that say, this is not a way to talk to me. And if you're going to choose to engage this way, if you're going to choose to bottle things up until they explode on my face, then I can't engage in this. And we have to figure out a new way of dealing with that, whether that means we're going to go work with a couples therapist or a coach, or whether we're going to try to figure out how to talk about this stuff ourselves. What would you add to that?
I was just thinking, wow, there's nothing I would add to that. I think that's a wonderful response. But I mean, I would agree. I think the person is being flooded. And usually, and I would also agree that typically when someone gets to that point, it's because they are struggling with boundaries altogether. And it's likely that they may have some people pleasing tendencies. And one thing I noticed in the comment where they're like, everything's great otherwise, except for this one thing. And it kind of makes me wonder, how great is everything else otherwise within that partner? Because I'm wondering if they're spending a lot of time sort of putting on a performance for everything being great and like not really establishing their boundaries all along until they've already reached the boiling point of no return, where it's become that pressure cooker, like I talked about, where things are being repressed, however consciously or unconsciously. And then there's something that snaps. And all of a sudden you have this big argument. And it's like, how and or why is it like this and now, and it's great all the rest of the time? Well, it's likely because they haven't actually been 100% honest about their boundaries all along. And they've been like not really honoring them or showing up fully authentically the rest of the time. So you sort of have this illusion that everything's going great. And then all of a sudden there's a big blow up and you're like, where the hell did this come from? And that actually is what happens when people have struggle with people pleasing, enmeshment. All of that typically lends itself to emotional dysregulation at some point as well.
Yeah, and it's like, their positive intent was, if I don't deal with this issue now, if I just stuff it, I'll still have happiness with my partner. But the problem is stuffing those emotions is they don't go away. Psychologists call it emotional leakage. It pops out passive aggressively in other parts of the relationship, or it compounds and it's kind of like a Coke bottle and you drop a Mento into it, some issue that really isn't that big of a thing, and it explodes on the relationship because so much of this stuff has been suppressed and bottled up. And what Briana's saying is that is right. While things seem great, they're troubling. And that partner who blows up needs to learn how to bring up these issues in a calmer way, be able to talk about what they're needing. And typically, that person is conflict avoidant because they're like, well, if I just sweep this under the rug, things will be okay. But the issue doesn't get dealt with. And you as a romantic partner get the aftermath, but don't ever get the how would I put this? The gift of being able to work with your partner on an issue that is upsetting for them to actually make the relationship better so that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so I really love that you brought that into the conversation.
The only other thing I would add to it is that my training at the Amen clinics is sort of popping in, but it's hard to kind of also say necessarily what it is because we haven't done a full assessment. So like one of the things, there's also things you would rule out too. So for example, when I worked at the Amen clinics, we used brain scans to offer diagnostic, feedback. And sometimes individuals would have these outbursts because they had an undetected brain injury, and a lot of us don't realize that you may have a concussion without even realizing it and the impact that has on the brain. And also sometimes individuals have a certain level of activity in different areas. So if someone's quick to anger or be triggered, it's usually because there's some sort of temporal lobe thing that was impacted in some way. So, did your partner play sports in high school? Did they have a hard knock to the head at some point? Did they have a car crash and seem to walk away unscathed, but there was some undetected whiplash? Sometimes there are some things like that also go undetected that lead to these psychodynamic things that evolve. And so what may have started with something physical has now become compounded by the way our environment responds to us, the way our partners respond to us. And suddenly we react, our partners react a certain way. Now, aside from just having a brain injury, now we have an internalized cognitive construct that tells us that I am someone who can't control themselves. And then we build a whole narrative and identity around that. So I just would add that I think that, psychodynamically speaking, I think Kyle and I are sort of speaking about something that we've witnessed in our experience. But it's worthwhile also just taking a look at the whole, all the dimensions of experience before we make a diagnostic thing.
Right. And I think that's one of the things I know in my practice. Like I do a full 90-minute session with a couple, analyzing their relationship. Then they take an hour plus assessment, and then I meet with them individually, and then we talk about all the goals. And even then I'm still doing ongoing assessment during the whole process because I'm looking for what are the things that are coming up. And often with partners, especially guys who are the ones that are aggressive, is there's an issue with vulnerability. There's masculinity, there's cultural dynamics, there's family dynamics that need to be explored in a safe space. And when you can do that well, that's where we get some of the changes. And sometimes there are these other physical, biological things that are happening within the brain or the body that occur. And there's research that supports that. Like guys from Dr. Gottman's research show that men on average flood much faster than women, especially in conflict. And so the key is then how do we adjust for that? And that's really kind of working on self-soothing, learning to engage, exploring the meaning of conflict, changing conflict styles, a whole bunch of other things that Briana and I have kind of talked about in today.